Hello and welcome to the British Sitcom History Podcast, and today we are doing part 2 of our look at Porridge, so if you haven't listened to part 1, please do go back and check that out. We've already talked in detail about Ronnie Barker and Fulton Mackay, and we're halfway through looking at the specific episode, which is Series 2, Episode 1, Just Desserts, concerning the theft of a tin of pineapple chunks. With all that in mind, if you're ready to go, let's jump straight back into where we were last week.
So in our scene here, Godber comes back, and Godber works in the kitchen, so he comes back dressed in his full chef's outfit with the apron and the hat on. Mm-hmm. Before we talk about what happens in the scene, should we talk a little bit about Richard Beckinsale? Now, obviously, we have talked about him when we did Rising Damp.
Yes, we've covered Richard Beckinsale's career quite largely, so I won't go into it too much. I mean, but he was known for sitcom. Somewhat to his chagrin, towards the end of his life, obviously he was moving and trying to get into more serious roles, and unfortunately died very young before any of that kind of came into action. But he was frustrated by playing the kind of young, naive, charming young man, and he was sort of like, well, I'm 30 now, I don't want to be playing that forever. He was best known for The Lovers, with Paula Wilcox, which was obviously him as a young man, and then he did Porridge and Rising Damp simultaneously, pretty much, which both became huge things. And then just as he died, he was filming a sitcom called Bloomers, which didn't really do much business. Okay. But yeah, I mean, if you've got Porridge and Rising Damp, they've stood the test of time, and The Lovers was huge at the time. It hasn't quite fallen into history in the same way. Yeah. But what a reputation, what a legacy for someone who died when they were 31. Excellent.
Yeah. And as we discussed, I've never heard anyone say anything negative about him.
Not just that, they're unrelentingly positive about him. Extremely laid back, very modest and humble for someone who was constantly being told how amazing and attractive he was. and great to work with, man. Perfect timing, professional and everything. So he seemed like the perfect package, really.
Yeah. So let's talk about Godber then. So the character of Godber, he's a sort of young, innocent naif who's got himself into a bit of bother, and you kind of think this will probably straighten him out. We'll not see him again in prison. He'll get his life back on track. He's a good kid. Well,
that's it. And the whole point of the character is that he could easily go into prison, fall in with the wrong crowd, and really become a bad kid. But
he's fallen in with Fletcher.
Just interestingly, Godber is known as Leonard Arthur Godber when you get his full name. Now, that means his initials are Lag. Do you think that's deliberate?
No, very good. No, that must be right. That must be deliberate.
He's the young, naive kid. And getting back to the reality of prison life, and the writers wanted to demonstrate that, he's scared. He's scared. He's in prison and he doesn't know what to expect. And, it's a bit of luck that he's been put in with someone who is, first of all, not going to take advantage of him in any way, but also going to look after him a bit and show him the ropes and feel sorry for him, feel empathy for him. What's really nice is that we see that over the course of 3 series, what is essentially a 3-year relationship that he's doing for a bit of housebreaking. There's never really any doubt that he's going to be okay and he's going to get out and he'll go straight. Like, once we establish that character, and there's a couple of moments where he gets into a fight with someone and he's really determined that he wants to be in a fight with them. And like, your parole's coming up in a week. Like, don't mess it up. Like, what are you doing? And so we have those little moments where he's obviously...
But that episode you just alluded to there. So Godber's masculinity has been threatened and he wants to have this fight. And Fletcher's trying to talk him out of it. And in the end, Fletcher gets into the fight himself and gets himself beaten up to protect Godber, to avoid Godber being in the fight.
Well, he doesn't actually get beaten up. He manages.
But that was the plan.
He manages to worm it, by luck, get out of it. But yeah, he's going to take one for the team, so to speak. Yeah. And Godber as well, we see here, obviously this is classic for any script, but sitcom, have the new person come in, and then the audience by proxy learns about this situation through them. So as Godber learns what prison life is like, so as do we. And the first episode of the actual series is a real classic. It's an amazing bit of writing, so much exposition, and there's a very classic scene of the two of them and Brian Glover being, going through the process of going into prison,
being
and
inducted into prison,
medical and all that.
Yeah, what religion are you?
C of E, I suppose.
C of E? That's no good, is it? No good being C of E. Everybody's C of E, ain't they? You get no perks with that, do you? No, you want to say you're a Sikh or something like that, and they let you grow your hair long. Or if you was a Muslim, you see, if you was a Muslim, you could get special food sent in from outside.
Don't like Chinese food.
But what we see is him learning what prison life is like because Fletcher's telling him, and obviously that means we get to understand all these little rules. You can get away with this, you can't get away with that. Don't mess with this. I'm going to give you a squeeze of toothpaste, but I want a licorice allsort in return. It's all these very quite petty, but when you haven't got much, that's what matters, and that's what we see in this scene between the two of them, where Fletcher's in a bad mood because his pineapple chunks have gone, and he knows it's not Godber, but now he's like, well, I'm not giving anyone anything.
Yeah, I trust no one.
Yeah, can I borrow your shoe polish? No.
Let's go back to our scene, and we got Godber walks in his chef's outfit.
Oh yeah.
And Mackay, who's angry about the pineapple chunks, he's angry about things going missing from the kitchen, and he turns on Godber and he says, "Oh, very convenient that you're working in the kitchen and all this stuff's going missing." And Richard Beckinsale does a great little turn, a lovely sub story about how, I'm getting my life back online. I'm a changed man. I'm serving my time. I'm on my way to becoming a decent member of society. And Mackay softens a little bit. Aye, good lad. And, takes his word for it. And then, of course, as soon as he leaves, Godber takes his hat off and there's a stolen packet of butter underneath his hat. Lovely timing. Lovely bit of physical comedy.
I think that obviously goes to show, like, that's what Godber's learned. You can...
Yeah.
You got to know when to bend the rules, how to get away with it, what the tricks are. And he really lays it on thick with Mackay, doesn't he?
A note there on the detail that the butter is Echo butter, which I remember. I remember Echo butter. My mum used to get that for cooking.
Yeah,
you wouldn't spread that on your bread.
Yeah,
that was baking butter.
Baking butter. That's helping us set up Godber can steal stuff from the kitchen, because that sets us up for a scene later on. So coming up now, we get a new scene. We've got Fletch in the library, which I don't think we ever see the library in any of the episodes.
No, I don't think so. Obviously, that's where he's working. He's got himself a nice cushy job there, and he's cataloguing all the books, which is taking him 5 weeks because when he finishes, he has to paint the room.
Yeah, exactly. So we get just in this one scene, we get that whole story that he's got a cushy job. He's dragging it out for as long as he can. Yeah. But what we do get in this scene is Mr. Barraclough, played by Brian Wilde, and that he is the sort of the fourth principal character, I'm going to call it, in Porridge of the 2 guards, 2 inmates. And again, just absolutely sublime casting and just perfect in every way. Mr. Barraclough is quite weak. He's a weak-willed person. He's easily taken advantage of.
I have a problem with the character. I think it's too much. I think he's too weak. I think he's too naive. It feels too much.
Right, yeah, okay, I get that. But he
reveals far too much of him. Like in this scene, it opens up with him talking about the problems between him and his wife. Like the idea of a prison officer talking about their marital problems with a prisoner, it's crazy.
But I think that's because it's Fletch. That's because it's Fletcher, and Fletcher has used his wiles to build a relationship with Mr. Barraclough, or at least one that Mr. Barraclough believes in.
Yeah,
because he knows that's the way to get in on with him. But yeah, I know what you mean.
Have a nice weekend, did you?
Not especially.
Oh, at least it kept fine for you.
Did it? The sun rarely shines in my household.
Oh, dear. Want to get another window put in?
This scene between Fletcher and Barraclough it really exemplifies the writing and how Fletcher will never say anything. He's so non-committal.
Yes.
Because he's so used to playing the game of and you'll see it whenever he has to deal with genial Harry Grout. He doesn't want to say, "Oh yeah, Harry, no problem, I'll do that for you." He does sometimes. He doesn't want to get involved. Whatever it is, I don't want to be involved. Yeah. And this scene is great because all this bit where Mr. Barraclough comes in and says, like, basically he says, I found these pineapple chunks in your cell and I've covered it up for you. Fletcher at no point says, oh, yes, they were mine. I stole them. Oh, yes, they were in my cell.
No. Barraclough says he found the pineapple chunks, and Fletcher plays it completely innocent. He looks at his filing cards and he moves a couple of books about. It's a lovely bit of business, and he just sort of casually says, "Oh, where's that, sir?"
It's so beautiful.
Just as if I don't know what you're talking about, sir.
Because that is so obviously someone desperately buying time while he's trying to think of what he should say. And then he goes, but at no point does Fletcher acknowledge that any of this is true, or he never says, "Oh, thanks, mate, for not doing me in."
He doesn't deny it, but he never admits it.
No, because if he denied it, then he could get called on it later. The less Fletcher has to say, the better. And there's another scene. I think it is the scene where Godber's going to get into a fight, and Barraclough comes over to him and they just have this little back and forth. And I think it must be Warren, who's on the other side, who's just like, what was all that? And neither of you actually said anything. And Fletcher explains what was unsaid.
Yeah, you have to drop that in. That's a really good scene.
What are you talking about, Mr. Barraclough?
Something's brewing.
Oh, good. 2 sugars.
You know what I'm talking about.
Do I? Oh, good.
Yes, well, I'll say no more.
No, I think you said enough. What was all that about? Jarvis and Godber had a barney in the yard. They know about it. They don't want it to go any further. If it does, it will be bad for all of us, but especially for the lad. My down, 666.
Because it's and then this scene as well. This one where there's sort of Fletcher's double speak. I guess it is, like he can talk his way around anything, and it's his really great writing. But obviously, that's his as a character. That's his strength. That's how he survives. Yes. Just from an acting point of view, Brian Wilde, I think Brian Wilde is amazing as this character, and I know he sort of specialises in this kind of character slightly.
Yeah, well, the only thing I know him from, apart from this, is Last of the Summer Wine. I don't really know him that because I never really watched Last of the Summer Wine. But what's his pedigree?
Well, yeah, I mean that's it, really. I mean, yeah, he was.
What had he done before this? He's not a young man.
Again, a bit like Mackay, doing stuff certainly, but not that famous. He another one. He was a bit of more of a Middle England kind of grammar school boy, but he went to RADA and then became an actor. Just little odd appearance. He's actually in The Bar G with Harry H. Corbett and Ronnie Barker, and he just a very brief role as a policeman. His main role known for before this was in The Dustbin Men. He was a principal character in that, and that was early 70s. So that was his breakthrough, I guess. That was the first thing where people go, oh, that's that guy.
Yeah.
And then Porridge, and basically taking over from Michael Bates, different character, but in Last of the Summer Wine. That started in 1976. So that was kind of while he was doing. And then the one other thing that was his kind of lead role was a bit like Fulton Mackay, much later on in 1988, was called Wyatt's Watchdogs. And again, just not a success. Boom, that was done. So they just brought in really good actors for these roles. They weren't really famous or anything in their own right, apart from Ronnie Barker. But there's one. I'm going to drop this clip in. Brian Wilde's delivery of the words "gammon steak Hawaii" is
yes. I'm so glad you said that. I'm so glad you said that because I thought I can't even try to do that justice on the podcast. Drop it in.
By the way, the tin of pineapple, did you manage to return it to the food store, sir?
Not exactly, no. See, I took it home, and the wife did a gammon steak Hawaii.
Absolutely wonderful stuff. But then it also set that, I mean, and that's pretty much what we get from Barraclough. It's that one scene, and then we see him briefly for a plot, element in the kitchen scene. We're halfway through the episode when he turns up. And that's the beauty of the writing in Porridge as well. They're not worried about giving each character their due. It's like we're going to use them as necessary around Fletcher. Fletcher's our centre, and when we work around him. It does become a little bit more structured later on, the later series, I think. But not in a bad way, but just I think it's really loose, that first series. You never really know what's going to happen.
All right, so the plan. So basically, what we've discovered in this scene is that Barraclough took the chunks, so there isn't a thief. But now they realise that they've got to replace those chunks because they've got to get them back into the kitchen. They've got to be replaced, but Barraclough's eaten them.
And how quickly Fletcher manages to turn this on Barraclough. Because Barraclough says, "Look, I've done you a favour."
He loses the moral high ground immediately when he admits he's eaten the pineapple chunks. But yeah, Fletcher just absolutely digs him out. Absolutely turns the tables. I've got the upper hand now again.
Barraclough says, "We're going to have to replace them." He goes, "What do you mean we? I'm not going to pop down to the shops, am I?" So that sets up our next scene where Godber has decided to...
This is good. Semi-farce.
Yes.
It's a good scene, a great scene.
Yeah, Porridge never really goes down the line of physical comedy very often. There's certainly not a lot of like, oh, I've stepped in the wallpaper paste. Oh no, like kind of
I'm with
type
you.
of comedy. But this is probably about as physical as it gets, where it's all about the staging. And this kitchen set we see quite regularly, and we have them sort of facing the front. And so it's not out of place. We kind of established this previously. We set up that Godber is like, okay, look, lukewarm, cause a distraction because I'm going to steal some pineapple chunks, and he's working with Warren in conjunction.
Godber's plan is to steal some more pineapple chunks for Fletch to make up for the fact that he's lost his.
Yeah, to make him feel better.
He wants to make him feel better. So they nick the pineapple chunks. The pineapple chunks are discovered missing straight away. They're busted. And Mackay comes along.
Do you know who's
that by? Because yes, I did recognise that guy. Is that the guy from To the Manor Born?
It is John Rudling who plays the butler. Yes. What's the name of the butler in To the Manor Born?
Brannigan,
Brannigan, something like that, right? What is she called?
Brabbinger.
That's it. Yeah, that's it. Yeah. So this was the sort of role he was doing before To the Manor Born. Just the odd little like a few lines here and there.
So yes, the physical staging here is the pineapple chunks are missing. Everyone's in trouble. Stand where you are. Mackay comes in. He's searching for the pineapple chunks. But in the meantime, Mr. Barraclough has sneaked in behind everyone and put another tin of pineapple chunks in the cupboard. So Mackay comes along, goes into the cupboard, discovers that the pineapple chunks aren't missing. Poor old Brabbinger's confused. The cons are confused because they know they've nicked these chunks. Where did that come from? It's a great scene. It works really well. I don't like farce. We've established this. It's not farcical really, but it's nicely put together.
Yeah, it all works very well.
And Warren's on his knees saying a prayer. It were a miracle.
Yeah, and then because then we have the next scene where they've still got the pineapple chunks. They know they've nicked it. So how the hell did that come from?
Yeah.
So yeah, they're convinced it's the miracle of Slade Prison, and then we just sort of have this little tail end scene to round everything off. Godber presents the pineapple chunks but hides them so that Fletch will discover them, and obviously Mackay comes in and basically discovers them himself accidentally. And after all that, Fletcher is in trouble for nicking some pineapple chunks.
But yes, that's really interesting. That basically Fletcher gets his comeuppance at the end. I think it would have been a lot. It would have been a lot more easy to just have, oh great, everything's worked out in the end. We got our pineapple chunks after all. Let's share them. You know, that would have been the happy ending. But no, Fletcher gets his comeuppance. He gets done for nicking those chunks.
I was listening to something with the writers Dick Clement and Ian Lafreniere, and they, or maybe I was reading it in their book, but they said it's nice to have a situation where your hero doesn't win all the time, and you can still make that work. You can still make it funny. But it gives it a bit more reality. You know, Fletch doesn't win every time, or sometimes he'll win one way and not the other. There's another episode in series 1 where at the end of the episode, he's getting thrown into solitary confinement because he's been caught doing something, but he's made a bet with a load of people that he'd be in his own cell by the end of the week. So he's won a load of snouts. So, you know, it looks like he's lost and he's actually won, or it looks like he's won, and then the little kicker is that actually you've been caught doing something. Or when he manages to reveal the tunnel without actually telling anyone, but he does so by dropping through the ground. You know, he ends up getting hurt by it. You know, all this stuff. It's not as straightforward as it needs to be. You know, there's just a little kicker on the end, and that's fine. That works.
It's a great punchline to the episode, and it's a really good episode. As I said when we started here, I really enjoyed watching Porridge. I really got a kick out of watching it from start to finish. Yeah, just a really well written, really well performed sitcom.
So before we sort of get on to what happened after Porridge, let's talk about the writers. We've obviously bringing them up throughout, but let's get into a bit more detail with them. So Dick Clement and Ian Lafreniere.
So another sort of double act. We've seen so many
yeah.
double acts of writers throughout the sitcoms that we've covered. I suppose my first question is: did they sort of exclusively write together, or did they do things on their own?
Pretty much, they've done the odd thing on their own, but the vast majority of their careers have been working together, and that career that has spanned decades.
Yeah, go back to the start for us.
So they were both born in 1937, so they're the same age.
Yeah.
Ian Lafreniere is from the Northeast, which is how they've ended up doing a lot of shows with people, Geordies in them. Yeah, and they met in London, I think in the late 50s, just as kind of like, young bohemian artists, performer, writers, living in a, not quite living in a squat, but, living in, dirty, cheap accommodation in London, back when London, you could live in London and be an artist. They just sort of ran in the same circles, met each other and obviously got on. And so they started writing together. They were writing sketches. And one of the first things they wrote was a sketch about two young men who've just been on a date. And the sketch was cross-cutting between the two young men talking about the date and then the two young women talking about the date and the kind of post-game analysis. And presumably that was hilarity ensuing. These two young lads were called Bob and Terry, and they're from kind of Newcastle.
I see.
This sketch was performed by one of the sketch reviews they did, and Dick Clement played Terry. So Dick Clement was the first person to play Terry out of what became the Likely Lads. And so they were writing stuff together, doing these sketches. Dick Clement was a bit more of a performer as well, but Ian Lafreniere wasn't. And then Dick Clement did a directing course. And this actually really reminded me of when we talked about Stephen Merchant and Ricky Gervais. Yeah. They were working together, writing together, and Stephen Merchant went and did a director's course and had to put together a production, which became a pilot for The Office.
Became The Office.
Basically the same thing here, which I didn't know. Dick Clement, as part of this director's course, had to produce a short film. He thought, that sketch with Bob and Terry, I'm going to pad that out a bit, make that work, we'll do that. Wrote something that was a bit bigger than that. And that essentially became a pilot for the Likely Lads. Dennis Main Wilson saw it, liked it, and commissioned a series. Yeah. And then, I'm not sure who this was, but they had a director attached, and he died. And so someone said, well, what about whoever directed the pilot? Let's just get them in. And that was Dick Clement. Obviously, he didn't even think it was a pilot at the time. So Dick Clement actually directed the first series of the Likely Lads. Even though he wasn't really a director of any experience.
Yeah, but he'd been on a course, so what can it be?
And sort of fudged his way through it, and in his own words, didn't have any idea what he was doing. And he has gone on to direct quite a bit. Okay. Ian Lafreniere hasn't particularly, but a lot of the films, the Porridge film, Dick Clement directed it. And
did he ever direct anything that he hadn't written?
Not really. I don't think so. Maybe The Odd Thing. Nothing too major, but they've...
What I mean is he was a writer who directed sometimes. He wasn't a writer.
Yeah, certainly written a lot more than they've directed. Yeah. And, they went on to write they've written loads of stuff, like lots of weirdly different stuff. So obviously they're best known for Sitcom, Likely Lads, Whatever Happened to, Porridge, and then Auf Wiedersehen Pet. The big one, which is probably more comedy drama than straight sitcom, but
it's not a sitcom. It's definitely funny. It's very funny, Auf Wiedersehen Pet, but it's definitely a comedy drama rather than a sitcom.
Yeah, but also they've written musicals. They wrote a musical adaptation of Billy Liar, for example. Most the musicals seem to be adaptations of stuff. They've done documentaries. They've written plays. They wrote that thing about Chasing Bono, I think it was called. Chasing Bono, Finding Bono, something like that.
Finding Bono.
Yeah, that was based on the real life, this journalist memoir kind of thing. So all sorts of just weird little things. They seem to just have a finger in lots of pies. But during the 70s, they went to America ostensibly to create a American version of Porridge. And then ultimately they did an American version of The Likely Lads as well. And they've stayed there. They've lived I think they still live in America now. But certainly that is been their main base for the last several decades. And so they really got into the LA lifestyle and Hollywood film set. And
fair enough.
They've made their own films and their own productions and stuff. But they've also done a lot of largely uncredited rewrites on some pretty major films. And so they did...
For example?
Well, they did a rewrite on Never Say Never Again, which was obviously like a bit of a messy production. They came in like after they started filming, but Sean Connery really liked them. And then 20 years later, when he was on The Rock with Nicolas Cage, on his kind of recommendation, they were brought in to do a rewrite on that.
Are you telling me that Ian LaFrennay and Dick Clement wrote that Winners Go Home and Prom Queen? Right?
Yeah, I think that's very possible. Yeah.
You're gonna have to bleep that.
And they did a rewrite on Pearl Harbor, which I heard them talking about specifically because obviously Kate Beckinsale is in that. So they were, they didn't know Kate Beckinsale, but they knew her dad and they knew her mother very well. And so they kind of met with her, and that was kind of they would just talk about that as quite an emotional experience. Some really quite big stuff, and large, like mostly uncredited because they've just been brought in to kind of punch up the dialogue or whatever. Sure. But then the odd little thing where they've done themselves, like Water that I was talking about earlier. That's one. And then Ian LaFrennay, without Dick Clement, was the person behind Lovejoy. Which they are based on books, but he created the series, wrote several episodes himself. Dick Clement wrote several episodes, but then there's lots of other people writing that as well. Which again is kind of a light comedy drama.
And Lovejoy, of course, starred Ian McShane, but one of the supporting characters, Dudley Sutton, who is in an episode of Porridge.
Yeah, who is in a very notable, but only one episode of Porridge, but a very notable character.
Yeah, the one where they take Barraclough and some of the other members of staff hostage.
Yeah, a really good performance, that actually. Like, that was one of those performances that jumped out. Like, I didn't really know Dudley Sutton from anything else.
The Desperate Hours, that's the episode, isn't it?
Yeah. But let's talk...
Really good episode. Yeah.
Let's talk about On the Rocks.
On the Rocks.
Yes. On the Rocks is the name of the American version of Porridge.
Oh my God, I didn't know there was an American version.
There was an American version. So they went to America, like I said, to do this pilot, and a little bit naive as to, how many pilots get made and, probably won't even become anything. But the producer they were using was the same guy who had done Till Death Us Do Part and turned that into, what is it called? All in the Family, the American version.
All in the Family.
And so, he had a great success with that. And so this was part of that big influx of British, British to America kind of thing.
Yeah.
So they did a version. It actually went to series, and very unusually, Dick Clement and Ian LaFrennay wrote it. The two of them wrote it all.
All right,
they didn't have a writer's room, which is the American system.
And was it like 74 episodes?
22, I think, 24, one series. But
I was joking, but yeah, that's a full series.
Yeah, and they just they got down and hashed them out, and I think they reused some material, but there's obviously
I didn't know this existed, much less ever seen it. Is it any good? Does it work? Does it translate? I know nothing about American prisons other than what I've seen on telly, but I don't know about British prisons either. But it just feels like a different dynamic.
Yeah, I mean, I've only managed to find brief clips of 30 seconds. It doesn't seem to really exist in any format. It's the only things, the clips that are like a trailer. You know what I mean? It was used as an advert, and so that's been recorded somewhere.
This really ain't such a bad slammer. It's a light prison. There are no high-power hoodlums in here.
Yeah, this camp's always had a lot of high-class, educated dudes.
More than ever now. Today, in this once great nation of ours, there's a very slender line between making a living and fraud.
But it's changed slightly, and one of the things they didn't like in terms of the reality of it, but I guess this is America, was that they did insist on having, and this is in the 70s, they insisted on having the diversity of the cast. So your main character is Fletcher is Puerto Rican, and then there's a black guy and a Jew and a white guy. Okay. And it's in a real prison, these guys don't mix.
They don't hang out.
But yeah, I guess that's okay, that's what we're gonna do. That's how it works. And it seems like it was okay, but not good. The writing was being scrutinized all the time in terms of this sounds too British, you need to make this more American and all that sort of thing. Even though they were essentially the only two writers. And then in one of the later episodes, they had a problem, and they're sort of very open and honest about this, that they had a problem with the lead. Just wasn't charismatic enough. He couldn't carry it, and that's a hard act to follow, Ronnie Barker, but he just didn't have it. And the producers said, look, we want to do something with Rita Moreno. Rita Moreno as in West Side Story.
No. Oh, yeah, okay, all right. I don't know her, but go on.
Well, she was famous for West Side Story, but this was about 10 years later. And they did a backdoor pilot in which she came to visit, and it was it was his cousin or something, like she came to visit, and so they built the episode around her with the idea that they could then spin it off as her own character. And they said she had so much charisma, yes, we want to do something with her. That was like, this is what we need.
Yeah.
And then the producers said, well, let's just do a second series, but with Rita Moreno as the lead. And they were like, well, it's a men's prison. And they just kind of said, like, no, this isn't going to work. And I think they were offered quite a good chunk of money to do something, and they were like, nah, let's just go off and do something else. So, and that was all happening while they were still doing Porridge in Britain.
How would you have handled that? Rita Moreno becomes a prison officer there.
Hey, have you seen Oz? Rita Moreno is what is she?
Oh shit, no, I haven't seen Oz.
Is she she's like the chaplain or the therapist or something? But she's in in the prison. Yeah. So yeah, just do that. Some of the third series of Porridge, as in British Porridge, are kind of rehashed scripts from the American thing, because they'd pulled all these ideas together, and so they used some of those in the third series.
Okay, that's interesting.
But yeah, I mean, they've worked with some big names over the years. They've worked with Michael Caine, who's in Water, Kirk Douglas, Richard Burton. I think they did a film with Richard Burton. They really are been involved in that American film scene and just been bubbling under, making a good career for many years. And obviously they're well into their 80s now, so they're not exactly churning work out, but they still live over there in America. They settled there. Yeah. Seem happy enough, and the last thing I heard an interview with them, which was only a few years ago, and they live 2 streets away from each other. They see each other every day. They write together every day. It's like a bit Galton and Simpson. It's actually a very beautiful kind of thing. This relationship they have.
Never a crossword.
Yeah.
Well, so interesting that I didn't know about the American version. What other spin-offs and follow-ups do we have to look at?
So the most obvious one was essentially series 4 of Porridge, which was going straight. Fletcher gets out of prison. So it's a direct sequel. I mean, Fletcher is in prison. What happens when he gets out? It did okay at the time. It just did the one series, and it just doesn't quite work. It's the same characters. You've got Fletcher, you've got Godber. Godber is going out with Fletcher's daughter, but they set that all up in Porridge. It was completely kind of organic. That didn't feel forced to have him in there. And it's... what does Fletcher do once he's out? He's trying to go straight, but he's got temptations. He's got things, blah, 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 blah. He's got Nicholas Lyndhurst as a dopey teenage son.
It is weird, because I watched an episode of this, and it's just missing something. I can't quite put my finger on it.
Yeah,
it's the same. It's the same actors that we like. It's the same writers. What's missing? It's just missing that X factor, and I can't place why it didn't quite work for me.
Yeah, maybe it's an authority figure. Maybe it is Mackay, or not necessarily Mackay, but that he needs something to be bouncing off against. And I think what I found was he was much less likable.
Well, there was the episode that I watched. There was a probation officer that he went to see.
Oh, played by Rowena Cooper out of The New Statesman.
That's right. Yeah. She was more like Barrowclough than like Mackay. She wasn't that authority figure. So yeah, maybe you're right. Maybe that's what's missing, that antagonist.
But also, I think, in prison, everything's against him. So every little victory, we're like, yay, he won. Whereas out on the outside, there is an element of like, yeah, we'll just stop moaning and get a job kind of feel to like he is. I think you can get away with that where if it was like, well, I'm trying to get a job and can't get one. Nobody wants to hire an ex-convict. But he just comes across as a lot less likable, and I think that's because he's sat at home going, "Oi, daughter, go and make me a dinner, will you?" Like not quite in that vibe. And perhaps in the 70s that just didn't matter. But I think it doesn't quite.
Yeah, that didn't put you off.
It doesn't quite play.
Another interesting thing. One of my first notes I made watching that was that Ronnie Barker looked a lot older. And it was only 2 years later. It was 1978 going straight.
Yeah,
but he just looked older. And I don't know if that was makeup or just different way it was filmed. I don't know. But it didn't seem like Fletch. It just didn't seem like the same character.
Yeah, it just doesn't have quite the same energy. Is not, and maybe because he's so downtrodden in prison that you're rooting for him all the time. But it's fun. It's a good little series, and it's certainly worth watching as an addendum to Porridge. And there's some, nice little guest appearances and stuff. Yeah, I mean, but then after that, they did the feature film in 1979. So that, again, was another year later. We've talked a lot about film spin-offs of British sitcoms. They're largely pretty poor, or at least just a rehash of old material. I think Porridge is a real exception to that. The Porridge film is written as an individual piece, and it works really well, and I think it does a really good job of expanding the world slightly. I'm not saying it's a perfect film or anything, but I think it does work really well. I think it, perhaps because Dick Clementine and Lee Frenay already at that point had experience writing longer format things,
right,
is perhaps a testament to that.
I haven't watched it for this podcast, but I think I might have seen it in the past. Is it there's an escape? Is that they accidentally escape?
Yeah, I think we'll probably end up doing a little spin-off episode of the podcast about this, so we won't get into it too much detail here, but yeah, they set up a charity football match where some celebrities are coming to play football, and genial Harry Grout is using that as an excuse to help someone escape, to get someone out. Accidentally, Fletch and Godber get drawn into it, and they have to go with him, and they have to escape. And so then the real trick of it is, how do they get back into prison without anyone realizing that they've been gone, because they don't want to get in trouble for escaping.
I do remember that.
It's a prison break-in film. Like, what a great idea. Yeah. Although that is only like the last 20 minutes, and there is a little bit of an episodic feel about it. But it works really nicely. And I think it would work as well if you're not familiar with the characters. They have a new young character come in that Fletcher has to help. So that helps us establish the characters and the world a little bit.
Mm-hmm. Incidentally, before we move on from that, can I just mention genial Harry Grout, who's obviously like the prison
Peter Vaughan
boss? Isn't genial just a great adjective? Like, you could have called him horrible Harry Grout, anything, just Harry Grout, but genial Harry Grout. There's something wonderful about that. That's really lovely.
I think it's interesting that we get the likes of Grouty and Ives in the film. You know, it's like they're bringing back all the kind of the favourite characters, yeah. And Grouty, like, he's a famous part of Porridge, but he's in 2 episodes, I think, maybe 3.
Yeah, he's not in it a lot. He's a presence. He's mentioned a lot.
He's mentioned before he's ever cast.
He only appears, later on in the series,
So that, I think the feature film is a really good addition. I think we'll probably do a bit on it at some point. There was a little curiosity called Life Beyond the Box. This was made in 2003, and they did a series of these, and this was just one of them, about sitcom characters, like Where Are They Now kind of thing.
Okay.
So that's what they did with this, and it was interviewing the characters from Porridge talking about Norman Stanley Fletcher in character.
That's a lovely idea.
It is. I don't know if it's that well executed.
Does it not work? I love the concept.
But so they have, like, for example, McLaren, Tony Asoba, is a Scottish MP. And then so they have his daughter, and they have, I think it's Sam Kelly's in it. And so they're talking about what he was like. And then Ronnie Barker himself kind of does a cameo right at the end. And the idea being that Fletcher has... ultimately, he got a pub, and he's been running this pub for 30 years, and that's how he's made his living, and he's just had a nice, comfortable life. It does feel a little bit kind of hashed together. I don't know, it doesn't quite work, but it's like you say, it's a nice idea. There was a stage show in 2009.
Please tell me it wasn't a musical.
No, it wasn't. No, okay. But it was kind of hashed. I think it was hashed together with like bits and pieces of other script. I don't think it was an original script.
Okay.
Do you know who they got to play Fletcher?
What, the year 2009?
Yeah.
Oh, I know, I'm never going to guess, am I? Go on.
Well, I'll tell you.
Paul Whitehouse.
Well, who they wanted and who I believe was in talks to do it, or perhaps was in talks to do a remake or something. Peter Kay.
I can see that.
And
I mean,
I can see.
The problem with Peter Kay is that he's Peter Kay, and he's very difficult. It would be very difficult to subsume himself into Fletcher, as we've talked about Ronnie Barker being a great actor.
Yeah,
but what I can see is a casting director thinking, yes, Peter Kay.
But I also think Peter Kay wanted to do it, and has openly acknowledged how much of a influence Ronnie Barker is, and Porridge particularly. And I just happened to watch recently, the Max and Paddy's Road to Nowhere. I watched that, and there's a couple of episodes in that where they're in prison. And it made me think of it then. But then it made me think, oh, yeah, you would have, like, Paddy McGuinness as Godber, and it'd be terrible.
Definitely. Yeah.
But I think Peter Kay would
Dave Spikey as Mr. Barraclough.
But I do think Peter Kay would actually make a really great job of that character. I genuinely do.
Did you ever see the Peter Kay in the Danny Baker sitcom? I can't remember what it was called.
I've only seen
Danny
a couple
Baker's
of clips,
sort of autobiographical. I really enjoyed that, and I thought Peter Kay was excellent in it.
Yeah. Well, in the play, 2009, the person who played Fletcher was Barry from EastEnders.
Barry from EastEnders. Off of Extras.
Yes, exactly. Right off the back of Extras. That would have been a couple of years later, wouldn't it?
Yeah, that's good. How were the reviews?
I think it was fairly well received, but not kind of. It didn't blow anyone away. They did a bit of a tour, and that was about it, I think. And then another major thing they did was in 2016. Remember, we had there was a bit of a spur of rebooting some sitcoms. They did Are You Being Served?
Yeah, I remember that. Yeah,
John Challis was in it playing Captain Peacock, and they did one for Porridge, but it wasn't a remake. The writers decided that they didn't want it to be.
I can't even let you get to the end of the sentence because I watched an episode of this because you sent it to me and it's god awful.
Yeah, well, I watched all of it, so. But yes, they did it just as a one-off, but that was popular enough to get a series apparently.
Okay.
But yes, it is written by Dick Clement and Ian LaFrennay, and it's all new material. It's not a reboot. It's not a remake. It's a reboot. The character that we're following is Norman Fletcher's grandson. So he's called Fletcher.
Yeah.
And he's in a prison in 2017.
He's in for some unspecified cybercrime, isn't he? Which is not proper crime. He's a good bloke.
Well, that's partly the problem. He's a hacker. And the part of the problem is that this was written by two men who at the time were 80 years old. And I'm not saying anything about, the older generation, but they're not famed for their knowledge of computing.
He done some cyber crimes.
There's something where he manages to hack a Wi-Fi system with a Pringles tube, and it is deliberately vague, and I'm just curious if there's some sort of basis in reality for it, where he just sort of catches a Wi-Fi. I don't, but it seems very. I don't know. I don't know
that Mitchell and Webb sketch where that Mitchell and Webb sketch where they have bad writers doing a medical drama. Oh, his pumpy thing's all gone.
But yes, I watched all of the 2017 reboot of.
Good for you.
Of Porridge, and it's frustrating because there is some nice writing there. There's some nice stuff. I think that the actors who play Mackay and Barraclough, or whatever the equivalents are, they're not the same characters. They're called like Maclay and Barrismore.
But they might as well be. Mark Bono plays Mr. Meeky.
Meeky, that's it.
Instead of Mr. Mackay, and he is doing an impression.
Well, I think they did quite a nice job of not quite trying to do exactly the same, but with the same.
I think Mark Bonner's the exception. I quite like Mark Bonner. I've seen him in a few things. I think he's a good actor, but he was doing a bad Fulton Mackay impression.
It's a tough one. That's a tough one to try and do.
You disagree?
I think he did it. I think it was okay, and that there was enough there that he's just bringing his own thing to it. But yeah, overall the series doesn't work. I have to say that the main problem is Kevin Bishop, who is playing the Fletcher character. And Kevin Bishop has this really serious problem in that he is a terrible actor.
Yeah.
First of all. But secondly, he's just really slappable. You just, as soon as you see him, you hate him. Yeah, so he's not likable at all.
He's the opposite of charismatic.
Exactly. And I've seen Kevin Bishop in other things, and he's always just easily hateable. And I guess you have to play villains if you've got that. You have to play the bad guy because you just can't do it. And that is a real problem. And one of the real main thing that I took away from it was just how he is not an actor. He's a comedian, and he cannot hit these moments. He's got the timing. He's not got the inflections. Yeah. I'll tell you what he does do well, and he is an impressionist. Let's not forget Kevin Bishop. That is basically what he is.
Yeah.
I think he does a really good job of having all the inflections and little moments that Ronnie Barker has, but without it feeling like he's doing an impression. But little looks, the little mouth movements and things, he does that really well.
Yoga!
Fletcher?
That's right, Mr. Meeky. It's all the rage inside. I bet you've noticed a big drop-off of aggro and mayhem.
I've never noticed you doing it.
Oh, yeah. I do it all the time.
Downward dog!
I beg your pardon?
Basic yoga move, Fletcher. Downward dog.
So I've got notes here that I wrote. I watched episode 5 of that series. These are 3 consecutive bullet points. Kevin Bishop is bad. He is not Ronnie Barker.
Yeah.
And that's basically my takeaway from the whole thing.
Yeah, he's really the weak link, but he's also...
I've got other notes, but they all basically are variations of those three things.
But when your weak link is the biggest link in the entire thing, like that is a problem.
Well, the episode that I watched, Phil Cornwall was in it, doing that impression that he does. And it's only a shame that John Sessions wasn't there to do that impression.
Do you know what? I actually really liked Phil Cornwall in that. He's playing that old rocker character.
He's playing a sort of Led Zeppelin type rocker, isn't he?
Yeah.
But, no, I'm being unfair.
I liked it.
He is pretty good in that. But there's a scene where he is... Basically, Phil Cornwall's on the roof, threatening to jump, and Fletcher has to go and talk him down, which we saw, that is a complete lift of a plot where McLaren's on the roof in the original Porridge and Fletcher goes and talks him down. Although in the original Porridge, it's all a bit of a setup job to get them both, he gets to go into the infirmary and he gets special privileges for talking him down.
Mm-hmm.
But I went back and watched the other episode and looked at them side by side and they were very similar.
That's a lovely little guest appearance by Phil Cornwall, though. I really like that. I think some of the acting is nice. Some of it's just very mediocre.
No, I listen. You're not gonna turn me around on this. I thought it was really bad. and like you said, the weakest link is the biggest link.
Yeah. My favourite bit was Dave Hill, who plays Joe Lotterby. So, first of all, little fact: Dave Hill is in one episode of Going Straight.
He's in Going Straight. Yes.
Yeah, but just
Going
completely unrelated, just same actor. But the character's called Joe Lotterby. The director and producer of Porridge was Sidney Lotterby. That's a little nod to him. And very much a mentor to Dick Clement, particularly, I think, Sidney Lotterby. I think he brought them in with Likely Lads and everything. But that character is like the guy who's in his 70s, has been in for years, and he's the old hand. And that character feels the most real and genuine. Again, reminder, the writers were 79, 80 years old when this was made. So I think that says a lot, that character is the one that jumped out to me as being the realist.
Yeah, I'm not sure I would go quite so far as to say this, but I'm going to say it anyway. Is he the aged Fletcher? Streetwise, cynical lag who's still there?
To some extent, I know what you're saying. I wouldn't quite go that far, but yeah, he's the one who's the old hand and he's gonna just keep his nose clean. And obviously Fletcher's doing that as well. But he gets drawn into what the equivalent of
Young
grouty is. Draws him into some dodgy business that he doesn't want to be part of.
And we spent a lot of time talking about the quality of the sets on Porridge. The sets in the newer version were really bad. Yeah, it looked like the first series of Red Dwarf. It looked like they'd been hand painted, by kids.
It's all Battleship Grey. Yeah. Yeah, I know what you mean. So that was a bit of a disappointment, I must admit. But I still think some of the writing is solid, but it's just ruined by Kevin Bishop. But
All right, that's enough about the 2017 version of Porridge, which I think was dreadful. Let's go back and summarise the original, which at the risk of repeating myself, I thought was great.
It's sublime.
It is a worthy classic. If you haven't watched it for a while, I would really recommend. It's all on the iPlayer. You can go back and watch it all from start to finish, and it's worth your time. Fletcher as a character is sympathetic despite being a bad guy on paper. That charisma is so important. But the strength of the show is the characters, and just we like spending time with them. Both Fletcher and Godber, you like spending time with them, and I think that's worth a lot more than laugh out loud gags. But there are gags. There are funny gags. There are funny lines. There's funny business, and the writing's just brilliant. I think it's a great sitcom.
I agree. Yeah, I think we've said this before. For me, it always comes down to writing and casting. I think if you nail those, you're on, and this is perfectly cast, right down to all those supporting characters, and quite a lot of supporting characters that they don't feel the need to overuse, which I would say, let's say the later stuff on Only Fools and Horses, where it's like, okay, Boise has to have a scene, Trigger has to have a scene, like they're not worried about that. They'll use them if they need them, and the script is right there as well. So on a more personal level, I really like, in my entertainment in general, in film, TV, whatever, I really like reality. I like kind of social realism. And so this really leans into that. So I think that's why this really pumps out to me as a personal favourite, as well as, overall a good sitcom. And yeah, I definitely, if I was going to put together my top 3 sitcoms, this would be right up. They'd be vying for number 1. I would have to come up with a good argument to not make it number 1.
I agree. It's one of those, like I say, it's a classic. And, if you make a list of your top 10, you're probably going to put this on there. But I have to admit, I haven't seen Porridge for, 15 or 20 years. So, I would say, yeah, it's a great sitcom. Yeah, it's a great sitcom. Of course it is. But how much did I mean that? But having watched it again, no doubt. No doubt.
Great. Well, I think that's us done for now. Thank you for listening. What's our socials, Gareth? Can you remember?
Yeah, so if you would like to follow us on Twitter, we are at BritComPod, and indeed on Instagram with the same name, at BritComPod. Or if you go onto Facebook and search for British Sitcom History Podcast, you'll find us there. And we post some interesting, fun stuff on there. We like to think we're influencers.
Great. Well, thank you very much for listening, and come back next time where we're going for something even older, I think. Even older.
Shall we reveal?
Are we sure what it is? I can't really remember.
No, I can't remember what it is.
I think we're going to do the army game next, but I'm not 100% sure what order.
Well, let's not say that then, because I can't remember what order we're doing.
Yeah.